Welcome everybody to unPAC episode number 14, where we're going to be talking about the ESG state of mind. I have with me today Q-PAC's very own CFO, Kevin VanDyke. Kevin, why don't you just start us off? Tell me a little bit about your background and how you landed here at Q-PAC.
All right, Kurt. So I'm a University of Florida grad in accounting and also got an MBA from the great school there in Florida. Started off my career as a CPA in public accounting, went into manufacturing for a bit, and then I found myself in horticulture and horticulture distribution, where I became a president of a company, and we grew a company from small to over 100 million in revenue. Experienced you name it, I experienced it, from being in the small side and being hands-on to getting to where we got. After that, I started an insurance agency and bought and sold millions of dollars of insurance, and then had spent some time in the health and fitness space. So it's been a very diverse way to get to Q-PAC. I got here from a friend who referred me to Matt Kent, the CEO, who during those years I had done some consulting and helped other companies grow. And Matt liked the story, so I like Q-PAC. It's an incredible company that we have here, and so I thought I would make a great stop. And now I can be the CFO and kind of go back to my roots a little bit, sharpen up some old tools that I've had, and try to help the executive team here achieve some of the growth that we have in store for us.
Sure. That's a very diverse background, and I assume there's a lot of overlap when it comes to just managing money behind the scenes. I mean, they're all businesses, right? So I don't know how much different there is between each one of those.
Well, I think everybody thinks that their business is different, but there are some timeless kind of principles that apply, I think, in terms of taking care of your people, taking care of your customers, taking care of your vendors. That no matter what you're really doing, the same fundamentals seem to resurface.
Right.
And some consultants may fashionably change the name or rework the label, but underneath it is still kind of the basics of like Warren Buffett said, there's two rules. First rule is always make money. The second rule, remember rule number one. So
sure. So I've heard you say multiple times, you're just the bean counter, but obviously it's a little bit more intricate than that. Tell me the role, generally speaking, of a CFO. What's their real accountability in any company?
The CFO has a pretty broad span. Just generally speaking, we're going to be on the kind of the financial management aspect of things, where we got the accounting, the reporting, budgeting, modeling, cash management, lender management, shareholder management, if there's any shareholders to deal with. A big part of what we're talking about today is on how we're involved in the capital and resource allocation. And so oftentimes, we're going to be a real lead part of what to do with our free resources and how to deploy them to get the returns that we want to get. We're involved in risk management quite a bit, and whether or not we're going to insure it or manage through uncertainty. Compliance and reporting, regulatory reporting, taxes are going to be a space that we're going to be the expert in, and cost accounting is another area that I think comes up. And then lastly is what another element for today is this ESG compliance, ESG sustainability reporting. I think is the latest area that the CFO is finding themselves in the middle of and being responsible.
Right. Yeah, I find it interesting that seems to be a newer one, but it's also a super important one in today's environment, just with any company, especially larger companies. ESG is environmental, social, and governance. Can you explain, why should CFOs or anybody else care about ESG?
So, some studies have shown that, well, let's get back real quick to just the capital allocation and capital resource allocation.
Sure.
So we found some studies that say, and it happens here at Q-PAC, that when the company's purchasing something above their threshold of a capital expense, the CFO is going to be involved. And 93% of the time, the CFO is going to be the final decision maker. Mm-hmm. And in the business that we're in, and our customers and other people involved in commercial HVAC, the items we sell are not insignificant. We're selling things in tens of thousands of dollars. And as a result, oftentimes, if not always, we're above the threshold that's going to get the CFO's attention. Yeah. And so if the CFO is going to be involved, then we got to start thinking about it, we got to treat them like a customer. And what are their needs and what problems do they have? And so the problem is, I'm a CFO and I'm maybe the lead person, or I'm on the team that's now, not only do I got to do my financial reporting to my investors, but I also got to do my ESG reporting to my stakeholders. Sure. And every capital investment that I'm considering needs to hopefully solve both of those obligations with positive news. And that's why ESG is important to today's CFO. It's not just in the old days where it was a return on investment or a payback. It was maybe a little more simpler. Now it's those two, plus how are the different rating agencies going to look at the investments we're making, and are we making strides in our decarbonization efforts, our electrification efforts, and the other elements that all roll up into sure. ESG scores.
It's like your 10Ks, like you basically have to do a second one just for ESG. And do you know how standardized these things are is for your financial practices, right? Like you have the GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles.
Sure.
ESGs, it seems to me like they vary a lot, and there's not necessarily a set way of scoring ESG and making it very standardized.
They've been trying to make it a formal report for quite some time, and I believe 2024, last time I checked, 2024 was the first year that the Securities and Exchange Commission was going to require ESG reporting in publicly traded companies in the U.S. Prior to that, for the last 2 or 3 years, there's been efforts to make it happen, but because of some of the settling on standards, settling on the requirements, it's been a bit of a challenge. So you have, at this point, 99% of the Fortune 500 have an ESG report or a sustainability report. Yeah. There's over 600 rating agencies involved in how to score your ESG score. So it's like any novel idea. It's a very noisy marketplace right now at the moment, and over time, the winners will be chosen, and it'll settle into something that a little more normalcy. But sure. At the moment, it's a little bit wild, wild west, I think. Yeah. There's a lot of creativity involved, and people can be subjective in how they present themselves.
Right.
And unfortunately, after reading too many of them, trying to be, half educated on this, a lot of it's just, it looks like people are just kind of going through the motions in some regards, and they don't have the specifics in the specific stories that could possibly make something impactful of, hey, I did this, right. I spent that, and we made this investment, versus just some kind of general language about taking care of their people, or doing some things with recycling, which is important. But I'm not sure it's really moving the needle or really inspiring.
Right. It's kind of a checkbox that you have to give this message at least to all of your investors,
right,
from a social standpoint. You mentioned something during the unPAC speech or presentation you gave that I thought was super valuable and insightful, and you called it the ESG currency. You said you have the dollar bill, and then you have ESG points, and sometimes ESG points are worth 10x the dollar bill. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
The ESG currency is a kind of an idea that, if you think back at, if you follow the incentives, then you'll follow the behavior. And right now, according to recent studies by Deloitte and by Harvard Business anywhere from 45% of CEOs have a compensation impact by their ESG scores. And I think 73% of the Fortune 500 has inside there some compensation related to ESG. So as a result, I may not make my bonus anymore purely off of profits or return on investment. Now I have another way to make a bonus as a leader. So let's just follow the money.
Sure.
And so when I'm choosing my decisions now, ESG points mean something. And so ESG scores could mean something.
Yeah.
And so as a seller, if I'm selling to somebody and I know that their leadership has this incentive in place, then I know I got to speak to it. Because if I'm trying to sell somebody an item and I don't address how they can get ESG out of it, well, then I'm asking them to leave money on the table, and that's generally not going to get the decision that I want.
Absolutely. And how, with all of these ESG points and the way the economy seems to be a little volatile right now, especially with the increased remote workers, and it's hard to fill office buildings. And I mean, how is ESG comparing in potentially a recessionary type scenario?
That's an interesting question, Kurt, because, when you can get a bonus, I mean, if the leadership can get a bonus and or your stakeholders can be satisfied by your ESG points, and maybe we're in an economic slump in, the office buildings perhaps, or other areas, well, you can still attract maybe capital, you can still attract employees by winning the ESG scoreboard.
Sure.
And there's also some statistics around, that the ESG budget is somewhat recession proof, that 80% of people will still make the ESG investment despite the macroeconomic cycle. And so again, as a seller of large capital equipment, I don't want to follow it. I don't want to choose to participate in economic cycles. I want to find a way to continue to grow our business, whether the macroeconomic cycle is going down or not. And so if we can speak to ESG, if we can find a way to deliver results to the CFO, who's going to be in that decision, then we can still get our product sold. And again, you're like, well, geez, Kevin, is this all about ESG, or do you really save money, or do you really save electricity? And of course, if we feel we do both, and therefore we've got, we got it covered.
Do you have a success story that we've successfully implemented a good project that added some ESG points and saved the customer some money?
Well, there's a lot of anecdotal stories that go around. Probably our best one is when we made, I think, page 30. We got a full page out of a building owner in Manhattan called RXR, and they highlighted a retrofit that they did in one of their buildings, and where they was it 45%?
That's what they
45%, 42% reduction in their electrical consumption, and so so we're just we sell fans, large commercial, HVAC fans for comfort cooling. This was a fan system that I can't remember how many floors it served, maybe 4 or 5 floors was the HVAC or the air handler that we replaced the fan for. We got them 42% savings on their electric, and that made a full page in their ESG report. And that's awesome. So that's meaningful, right? So they spent the money, it was a win-win. They got the ESG credit, and they're saving money on top of it, and they have a more reliable system in their building. Long term, it'll have some savings in terms of also on the maintenance side of it, because the differences between our system and maybe traditional systems.
Yeah, it's absolutely. I mean, it's super important if our product can actually, without any ESG assistance, it still makes sense for people to purchase. I mean, was it 34% of all energy in commercial buildings is just on ventilation alone, which is pretty substantial. So, it's. Why do you think it's important to tackle like these larger systems in a building now, as opposed to some other potential ways to save energy and get some ESG points?
Kurt, I'm kind of practical when it comes to like these ideas, right? Like some of the stuff to me is a little nebulous. in terms of, I mean, an ESG point, is some rating agency and some things that, a little bit out of my control sometimes. So, but one thing I know we can control is the dollars that we invest and the dollars that we expect to get back. And so our systems, we know, either one, I mean, probably the most important thing is when you're dealing with a traditional fan that's a single point of failure versus an RRA, which eliminates that risk. And what's the risk or the cost of a sudden shutdown or a failure? And, that alone, like, the idea of running to failure just gives me the creeps. I mean, like that, you have people who are in these critical situations and, you have a device as a single point of failure that can run to failure and somehow, stop. Our system eliminates that because of the array and the redundancy. And so that's value by just itself, item for item. And then our electric consumption, time and time again, we get anecdotal, not even anecdotal, real data back from our customers where they're sharing, 42% reduction. The big campus up in Ohio, they've experienced significant, not only electric reduction, but also in their operating expenses because there's no belts to change, no bearings to grease, no springs to balance. And and then on top of it, we find ourselves even competitive on the first dollar. So, we win first dollar on the install, operating expenses. Yeah. All that makes for a pretty strong economic argument.
Right.
And then on top of it, those same benefits get you the ESG points that you're looking for.
Yeah. Just kind of a cherry on top.
Yes.
So if I'm a facility manager and I'm like, yeah, Q-PAC's great, I understand the needs, I don't want to have these critical failures that I have to run in, like, what do you have any advice for them on how they can present something to the CFO so that doesn't get vetoed?
Well, I've never been in a real estate role, but I've had a fleet of 100 vehicles, and part of what you're dealing with is how long can you run an asset for? What's the expected life? And at some point, you come to this point where I gotta get a new one, or I gotta repair it. And if I gotta get a new one, am I gonna replace it with something that I just had, or am I gonna upgrade it? And I think a facility manager often, my understanding would be they have an asset tool that lists all their mechanical pieces of equipment that are material enough to worry about. And they have an estimated life. And at some point, we have to face the decision. And, they're looking at the repair and maintenance. And if they repair it too many times, somebody says, isn't it cheaper just to buy a new one?
Sure.
Or if we're repairing it and we get one of these repairs results in a absolute failure, like we had last Friday, where a operating room in a hospital had a fan fail and their operating room was down. And that's an awkward position to be in if you're a hospital. That shouldn't be something that you really want to deal with. But we have a great heroic story of getting a fan system built and shipped, and by Monday they were back up. But a facility manager, I think, if that's a possible outcome, a facility manager could probably make a great case for, how to retrofit or how to upgrade so that you never find yourself in that position. So you're going to use that schedule. You're going to look at your asset life, and then you're going to try to get with your CFO and talk about the cost of a failure, the cost of an upgrade, the benefit if we can get some electrical reduction, the benefit for the ESG, and you're going to put together a picture of how that all works.
Sure.
And you got to think about it ahead of time, because these cycles, in many businesses, you really only get one budget cycle to make this plan.
Right.
And so, so there's a season, a time of year where you got to be prepared, because kind of the money's going to get allocated and it's going to be good for a year. I mean, that's kind of old school, but I think maybe more different businesses are maybe shortening that cycle into half years or quarters. But nonetheless, if you miss the window with your arguments, you don't get a chance until the next window.
Sure.
And I think that's a facility manager's got to understand that and know when it's time.
Now this ESG point maybe just be another arrow in their quiver that they can bring to the CFO.
Well, it'll definitely get, allegedly, again, an ESG investment, 20-year paybacks, which ordinary investments, that probably wouldn't get a CFO's attention. But if I can get points and a 20-year payback or a 5% return, all right, well, again, I got bonus riding on ESG points.
Right.
So there is an incentive there.
Yeah. Speaking of incentives, are there, what are some incentives that are out there? Are there government incentives for going through with some of these programs? I know there's 179D in New York and Manhattan. You mentioned Manhattan. What do they have going on?
Well, there's kind of a couple of things in Manhattan. When you're threatened with a fine, is that considered an incentive? Is that a carrot or a stick?
Sure.
But I believe the local law 97 in New York City is going to involve, if you don't bring your electrical consumption down on your buildings, then you're going to be subject to some fines or penalties. So you're going to pay. You can either pay with getting new equipment or better equipment or upgrading equipment or some combination of the above that reduces your electrical consumption, or you're going to pay the city. So it's, that's that. But in other cities or areas, there's a group called ASHRAE, which I'm sure everybody here listening is aware of. They have a rule where if you can get your building studied and get below a certain amount of consumption with your new equipment, then you qualify for a IRS 179D, which will accelerate your depreciation, which will allow you to lower your taxes if you're a private company and you pay taxes. And if you're a nonprofit or a governmental entity, that impact you can pass along into the designers of your new system. So I wouldn't say there's experts that you can find to really talk about 179D. I wouldn't call myself an expert at it, but I do know that if I was facing a capital improvement that was going to lower my electrical consumption, I would be pursuing that as a way to help maybe finance it.
Sure. Yeah. That's great. Well, thanks, Kevin. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with?
Well, this LinkedIn interview process is great. And, we have some competitors and other people in the industry that do this. And I just, at Q-PAC, our fans involve using ECM fans, which is a funny kind of a concept. ECM brings out some debate on, AC versus EC and whatnot. And I would just say that contrary to a recent video interview between some other industry leaders, the EC lead time is not 40 weeks or 50 weeks as was projected. In fact, as an example, we just did an order on a Friday and delivered it that same day or shipped it that same day for that hospital with a broken air handler. So our lead times at Q-PAC are same day for certain cases. And but ordinarily we operate on an 8 to 16 day lead time. And so if somebody is believing that an ECM solution is best for them in using our technology, you don't have to wait for it. We're ready to go. And so that would be my closing thought. That's my closing pitch.
That's great.
Is we have great lead times. We have great suppliers that keep us fed full of ECM fans. And despite the rumors, we have them ready to go.
Yeah. Awesome. I love it. Yeah. 8-hour lead time versus 40 or 50 week lead time is a big difference to the market.
That's a big difference.
It's impressive. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Everybody, before we get to questions, I have a couple of announcements. Next month, we're going to have another quick unpack, and it's going to be hosted by Salem. And we're actually going to be debuting a little bit of our new Quips 2.0. So we're going to have a front end update on Quips. It's going to make it a lot more accessible and easier for everybody to manage all your projects.
What is Quips?
Quips is our selection software. Thanks, Kevin. So a lot of people out there are listening may not have access to it, but it's the reason we can move so fast. We have a bunch of programmers. You can go on there, you can select your fan system, get an instant quote, and it sends drawings instantly to our team. So it allows us to be super fast in this industry where speed matters. So also, registration for unPAC. We have a date, October 17th. So if you want to come to our factory for our unPAC, for our impact summit, please go to our website and you can register now. All right, Ryan, thanks for the question. Is there a calculator online to easily convert the energy savings utilizing Q-PAC versus existing blowers? We don't have one online, but if you want to reach out to us, we have many versions of a rough Excel sheet that we can do for you. Our sales guys are also application engineers, and if you can give them the right data, they can fill out that sheet for you and show you exactly what the savings are going to be. So great question.
Thanks.
All right. Any other questions? All righty. Please fill out the survey at the end. We would love your feedback. We want to make sure that these are all for you. So if there's anything you'd like us to see or do differently that would optimize your time and spending time with us, then please fill out that survey and let us know. But without any other questions, thank you everybody for your time. Have a great day.